Hello, this is Mesos Aurum, and welcome to the S.F.M.L tutorials. Today, we will be constructing a Conway's Game of Life class. First, we will make a .c++ file, call it G.O.L, all capital letters, and we'll make a header file with the same name, G.O.L. Here, we will sharp include randomize.h as well as sharp include images.h. We will make our class as usual, class G.O.L, private and public. In our constructor, we will call for a board size, say G.O.L SF vector to u board size, and make our deconstructor. We will need to start with a random board, so we will say randomize pointer randomize. We will need to know the size of the board, so we will say SF vector to u size. We will need to know how many neighbors we have, as well as the state of the board, so we will say unsigned int pointer neighbors, as well as unsigned int pointer board. We will be calling our images class, so we will say images pointer images. We'll be defining the cardinal directions in our board, so we will say int direction 8. And now we need to initialize everything, so we will say void init randomize void init neighbors void init board void init images, and lastly void init directions. Now we will be defining these. Say that. Init board, init images, init directions, our constructor, and our deconstructor. Firstly, in our deconstructor, we will say delete randomize, delete images, delete square brackets neighbors, and delete square brackets board. Up in init randomize, we will say randomize equals new randomize. I'm going to clean this up a bit. In init neighbors, we will say neighbors equals new unsigned int size dot x times size dot y. Board will be much the same, so we will copy this. Board equals that. Up in randomize, we say randomize int between 0 and 1. Back in init board, we will need a double for loop, say for unsigned int y equals 0, and y is less than size dot y plus y, and for unsigned int x equals 0, x is less than size dot x plus x. We will clean this up and then say unsigned int index equals y times size dot x times x. Now this will give our exact position on the board in x and y axes. Now we say board at index equals randomize, random I, and we will set all of our neighbors to 0 equals 0. Scrolling down a bit, in init images, we will say images equals new images as size. Now this next part is a bit long-winded, so I will be commenting on every direction. I will say right is direction 0 equals 1. Down and right is direction 1, which equals size.x plus 1, and I will be copying size.x. Down is direction 2, which equals size.x. Down plus left is direction 3, which equals size.x minus 1. Left is direction 4, which equals -1. Up and left is direction 5, which equals negative int size.x minus 1, and I will be copying this part right here. Up is direction 6, which equals negative int size x, and lastly, up and right is direction 7, which equals negative int size x plus 1. Scrolling down to our constructor, we say size equals board size, and do all our initializers. Init randomize, init neighbors, init board, init images, and init directions. Back in our .h file, we will need to check for neighbors, so we will say void check neighbors. We will need to check our board, so we will say void check board. We will need to update the board, so we will say void update. And in main, we will need to get the sprite, so we will say SF sprite get sprite. Now we need to define these, so we will say check neighbors, check board, update, and get sprite. In get sprite, we will say images get sprite. In update, we will say first check neighbors, then check board. Now we will make this a little cleaner and go and check neighbors. Now check neighbors, we'll need a for loop for unsigned int I equals 0, I is less than size.x by size.y plus plus I. Here, if the board is on, we will be adding to the surrounding neighbors, and we do not need to add if the board is off, so we will say if board at I equals 0, continue. Now if the board is on, we will need another for loop for int j equals 0, j is less than 8 plus plus j. Now to get our neighbor's position, we say int index equals I plus direction at j. Now we must keep inside the board, so we'll need two if statements. If index is less than 0, index plus equals size dot x by size dot y. Now I'm going to copy this and say else if index is greater than size.x by size.y minus 1, then index minus equals size.x by size.y. After all that, we say plus plus neighbors at index. So that here we are adding to our neighbor's neighbor count, and we'll scroll down a bit in checkboard. Here we'll only need a single for loop for unsigned int I equals 0. I is less than size.x by size.y and plus plus I. Now I will write out the rules. If on and neighbors does not equal 2 or 3, then off. Although if off and neighbors equals 3, it becomes on. And so we can write it as this. If board at I equals 0 and neighbors at I equals 3, then the board at I equals 1. Scrolling down to give us more room. Now, else if the board at I equals 1 and the neighbors at I is less than 2, or the neighbors at I is greater than 3, the board at I equals 0. Now below that, S.F.M.L, we'll be giving it color. Board at I equals 1, question mark, S.F.M.L black, otherwise S.F.M.L white. Now we need to change our index into x and y coordinates, so we'll say unsigned int x equals I modulus size dot x, and for the y we say unsigned int y equals floor I divided by size dot x, and we will make that into a position. Say SF vector 2u pose as in position equals SF vector 2u x y. Now to set the color we say images set pixel at position and color. At the end we set our neighbors at index to 0. And finally, outside the for loop, we will say images and update texture. Now, after saving, we will go into the game.h file. Up here, we will say sharp include G.O.L.h. Scroll down. Now we will say void init G.O.L. And we also need to say G.O.L star G.O.L, and then define init game of life. In here, we will say G.O.L equals new G.O.L as a size of width by height. Scrolling down a bit, we will say G.O.L update. Scrolling down a bit more, we will say window draw G.O.L get sprite. Scrolling a bit more, we will init game of life and delete game of life. And finally, we will save. I had to go through the code and noticed a big error. This multiply needs to be a plus, and save. Now we can finally enter the debug menu and see that the game of life works. Now scrolling down a bit, to finally explain, we are taking a board size that we get from the game class and then putting it as our size of a board. This size can be any size that you would like. I just happen to set it as the length and width of the screen. Now, first off, what we're doing is we are calling our randomize class and then setting our ints as a random number between 0 and 1. Then we are initializing all the neighbors in our board. Then we are initializing our board and randomizing which cells are on and off, and saying that our neighbors are all 0. Next, we are initializing our images class. Then we are defining the cardinal directions. Scrolling down, for our update loop, if our cell happens to be alive, we will add a single neighbor to each neighbor. Otherwise, we will continue on. Next, we will check the on and off state of our board, and then color the board. Finally, the game class will call update and then render using getSprite. Thank you for joining me today. If you did, then please like, comment, and subscribe, and have a great day.